So let's start with you guys introducing yourselves, your firms, and then if you could, and we're talking about Brazil startups, but we can, if you want to broaden the LATAM, that's okay. Outside the introduction, if you can talk about your favorite investment you've made so far this year in Brazil or LATAM. Mercedes, can we start with you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mercedes Bent. It is like the car. And I'm a partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners. I've been there for 4 years. And excuse my voice, I'm coming back from Money 2020. Big fintech conference, so I lost that. Lightspeed's been around for 23 years. We're a large global fund. We've invested in early companies like Snapchat, Affirm. We're also investing in growth stage companies like Stripe and Carta. And I started out my career working in financial services. I was at the Federal Reserve, our central bank, in '09, and then I was at Goldman Sachs in the asset management or wealth management division for several years. And then I spent a bunch of years as an operator, got to see the product management GM side, the fun ride from nothing to moving a company up to 100 million in revenue and selling it. And so at Lightspeed, I invest and lead our Latin America region. We've only done one investment in Brazil this year, so I am going to have an easy answer on my favorite. And that is a company called Kumbuka, which is a multiplayer product that has visions to become an asset-light layer on top of Pix and open banking. And I'm sure I'll share more about it today, but we were just really floored by the founders' ability to see the future and describe a vision of where Pix is heading that I had really heard from nobody else.
Amazing. Was that the Series A or what round?
This was a seed.
A seed round. Okay. Amazing.
Sounds cool. I'm Nick Shalek. I'm part of a firm called Ribbit Capital that focuses on global investing in fintech. We've been investing in Latin America and Brazil specifically since the start of the firm. I've been there since we started 11 years ago. And we invest in basically entrepreneurs who are trying to change finance, whether at the infrastructure level, the application level. And we really just are trying to be part of making money better around the world. A favorite investment this year, we've been longtime investors in Nubank, and we've gotten to know different parts of the team. One of the members of the team, or a few members of the team, have been involved in starting a new crypto asset-based company called Newcoin. And we're big investors in decentralized networks globally. And I think there's a lot of potential. So even as things like Pix grow and Brazil launches a central bank digital currency, I think there's a lot of opportunity for investments in crypto in this very contrarian moment in the market.
Cool to hear about the flywheel of Nubank alumni starting to start other companies. Adriana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Saman. I'm with Clocktower Ventures. Clocktower Ventures is a fintech-focused venture fund based in Los Angeles. We started 8 years ago, similarly with the purpose of making financial services better for the world, mainly only in the US. And in 2021, we launched our LATAM dedicated strategy. So we are now proud to say we have the largest fintech portfolio in Latin America with 42 companies invested to date. And it's a strategy that we're very excited about and very committed to continue developing over the mid to long term. In terms of my background, I'm originally from Ecuador, born and raised. Started my career at JP Morgan, did investment banking, covering LATAM for a few years, and joined Clocktower 5 years ago, originally to cover the US and now expanding our footprint towards the region. Favorite investment, also made only one this year, and I think it's because we closed this year. We really sort of committed last year. It's a company called Hyperplane. It's Brazilian founders that actually all went to Stanford, so I think it's very thematic with the conference today. They're building software that enables local banks to underwrite better and offer higher quality services using AI to improve the way they process their own data. So very excited about them and the potential applications it could have beyond Brazil as well.
Last but not least.
Yeah, I am the Brazilian one here. I'm Marco Camhaji. I'm the partner at Upload Ventures. We make like seed and Series A investments in the region, mainly Brazil, but we also have investments like in Mexico and Chile. We have like a generalist approach, more focused on the B2B side of the investments. And talking about the company that I will talk about one company from our portfolio just to get rid of the fintechs, because I mean, just fintechs here. We have like a health tech taking advantage of like a very local problem in Brazil, what we call like occupational health. But because of the regulation, it's mandatory for every single company. There is like a big problem, a big gap in terms of like quality. And they are able to actually, they have been like able to ramp up like really fast, growing like very consistently, and gathering like very meaningful data to actually run like a much better like health assessment of like companies and the employees. So we do like a lot this play.
Very cool. We're certainly seeing more health tech companies coming out of Brazil and LATAM. And Marco also, in his spare time, is a good friend of BayBrazil. He's still is CFO for us. So thank you, Marco. Okay, so you guys already started to talk about how long you've been in LATAM. So let me change it up just a little bit for Mercedes and Nick. You guys are global investors. So, and I know another client of ours in India is Razorpay that both firms are involved with. So when you look at Brazil or LATAM relative to other parts of the world, particularly in this market, how do you compare the opportunity set?
I would say quite favorably right now. You know, the two places in the world where you're seeing the fastest innovation in financial services, and again, that's our lens primarily, are Brazil and India, because Pix and UPI, the infrastructure is changing very rapidly. You have regulators who are emboldened by some success. Usually regulators are very risk averse, as I'm sure everyone here feels the same. So in those markets, you see really a lot of change happening in a short period of time. I think when change happens, it creates opportunity for entrepreneurs. Incumbents, by definition, are sort of resistant to change almost universally. And we think that's like the entrepreneur's opportunity. It's an opportunity for scaled companies like Razorpay or Nubank, or scaling companies like Stark Bank. But it's also it creates these windows of opportunity for entrepreneurs to come and imagine new things. And I think Pix, has already gotten 90% plus penetration of the population. So on one level, it's already been a major success. But we're just starting to see the beginning of like the levels of innovation that might happen on top of this very basic infrastructure.
I would also say, one of the interesting things, if you juxtapose just those two markets, India and Brazil, is that, India has a much lower GDP per capita than Brazil and Mexico. But of course, it's a much larger market by population, billion 3, I think it is, or 1.4 billion. It's now the largest country in the world. Population versus 200 million and 120 for Mexico and Brazil. 600 for all of Latin America. And so what I think that means is that you actually see venture investors take a different approach to the two markets, where for our firm, for example, we have a dedicated team on the ground in India. We have maybe 5 to, I actually don't know the number, but I want to say it's like 10 almost investors now on the ground. And in Latin America, it's myself and my partner Alex covering it part-time from the US. And we also started, of course, in Latin America much later than we did in India, where we started, back in 2006. But I think the multinational versus single country market makes a big difference for what people think the eventual prize can be, which is unfortunate because Brazil's actually had a ton of great fintech exits already. India is really just started to have their fintech exits in 2021. And so, we are trying to spend a lot of time internally making sure the broader global organization understands how big the opportunity is. I think if you look at Brazil and Latin America, they are punching far above their weight in fintech specifically on a global scale. And I really think of it as probably the third, fourth most, largest fintech market in the world. And so that's where we spend a lot of time discussing in our team. And I think that entrepreneurs also can use this lens to frame to investors why the market is just so exciting. One of
the startup presenters from Blip earlier brought up Julio Vasconcelos' report from Atlantico. And he always compares Brazil and India. And so we've got to get, I'm going to make this happen. We're going to get like some sort of debate happening. I think it'd be super interesting. But Adriana, if you could just, I know LATAM is one of the few geographies that Clocktower is choosing to invest internationally. What was it about LATAM that really attracted you to the opportunity?
Well, having been born and raised in the region has an impact. I think that's what drew us to see opportunity at first, and it's not what drew us to raise a fund. What we're seeing, it's building on what Mercedes said, LATAM, even compared to Africa and India, like the GDP per capita and the macro factors that are set up in the region are so much more attractive than many other emerging markets. And being fintech investors, we saw a unique opportunity in the current setup of the financial system that we got very acquainted with and we are very excited about. So LATAM banks are amongst the most profitable in the world by ROE. And they're also highly concentrated oligopolies, like 5 to 8 banks in each country dominate roughly 85% of the market share. And that is attractive for many reasons. First of all, they carry a very important weight in GDP and market caps already, so it's an attractive incumbent to go after. But there's also, they can afford to be this profitable by servicing only the top part of the population, right? So there's this huge blue ocean to tap of the remaining 90% of people who have not accessed services or have never had the opportunity to access them in a convenient, efficient way because they've never been attractive given the tech infrastructure that has been available to these incumbents in the past. So we find this setup incredibly attractive for our expertise as fintech investors. And our strategy of being ecosystem driven, always co-invest in our leading rounds has allowed us to embed ourselves very deeply amongst the local scene. So we get to see a lot of the founders and invest with a lot of the local funds. And I don't think we can replicate that dynamic anywhere else right now.
Being the largest fintech investor by number says quite something.
Certainly not by dollars, but it's okay.
All right, Marco, well, you are the Brasileiro here. So, from your perspective, sort of, thinking about the local Brazilian startup ecosystem, there's always criticism that there's not enough early stage capital in the region. Is that still true? And if that's the case, especially as companies scale and need more, sort of growth capital fund businesses, certainly the funds on this panel become important partners. How do you view that dynamic today?
I tend to disagree that there is no capital for especially for seed and some Series A. We still see some movements. I actually believe that there is a market issue going on right now. So companies are trying to stretch a little bit their runway, and that's what's happening, right? So they are trying to get more traction to eventually get rid of this window, this winter window that we are having in tech, and eventually raise later. What is uncertain for me at this point is understanding whether we're gonna have a strong Series B players in the region, right? Because it was part of SoftBank, Tiger. I know that Tiger just made an investment in the region. Seems that they are coming back, but I think there is uncertainty about this Series B, and for the larger companies, I don't see this problem going on.
And are there things that you do specifically to build relationships with Lightspeed and Ribbit, et cetera?
Not yet, right? Just starting.
Your opportunity.
But we do have co-investments in the region, and I believe that is also because we are a recently very recent fund, so that's the reason why.
Let's stick with you, Marco. With in terms of quality of deal flow right now at the early stage, quality of founders, what are you seeing? And if you have an example,
what I noticed from from our deal flow is actually a reduction in terms of like number of companies. So definitely like a drop like by 50%, I would say, in terms of like deal flow number. Happening, especially in the seed round. So we are very bullish. Honestly, I think there is, for those seed companies, there is a huge opportunity ahead, right? Because the market's not that competitive anymore. Funds at the same time, like they have the optionality to actually like make a proper due diligence. So everyone is investing better. And I do feel that this cohort like might bring very good results.
Adriana, any at the early stage as well, anything to add or different?
No, I agree with Marco. I think if you really want to start a company now, that capital is not as easy to gain. You require to have much more conviction in the idea and your ability to succeed. And I think that filters out the kinds of founders that are seeking capital in a positive way. We're biased to fintech, obviously, and it has still been slower this year than I expected. I keep hearing that stuff is happening in LATAM, and it has mainly not been fintech. So I'm hopeful that we can feel it starting to change, and we're seeing many things like in the past month or two. We feel a difference. I think it's the best time to invest because you still get this ecosystem boost that we had in the past 2 years of so much capital that came to the region. Like on one end, it wasn't great. On the other end, I think it exacerbated. It took a year to get to a point that it would have taken us 5 years to get to, in terms of the amount of founders and the amount of people who think studying engineering is cool, tech is cool, product is cool, students wanting to join startups after school. It's a radical change in mindset, and like you can probably validate it. And so we're getting that. That's not going away, but prices are lower. Entry prices are much more attractive. So I think it's the best time to invest in LATAM.
And switching to the maybe the growth and later stage for Nick and Mercedes, obviously during the pandemic and then the peak in 2021, there was so much capital coming in internationally. Marco brought up Tiger, SoftBank, et cetera. So, at your shops, has there been any change to the posture of investing in growth stage in LATAM today? And maybe more broadly speaking, what do you think it will take for some of the international growth stage investors to jump back in?
Yeah, we did 2 Series Bs in 2021, and then and those were both first quarter of 2021, and we haven't done a Series B since. We've done seeds, we've done As. We definitely were a little bit more cautious because in 21 and 2022, the valuations were just so high. And so we are trying to kind of use our muscle. We have, of course, tons of capital to deploy and think about where we would be able to get comfortable at what we actually intended. It was our original strategy to go in for Series Bs in the region. I think right now we just have a lot of uncertainty around pricing. There's still, what we're seeing globally around the world is overfunded models where the price from the prior round is so high that we either have to do a down round or a cap. Recap, and at that point, maybe it makes more sense for the insiders to do the round, and that's what we're seeing happen. And so we're just trying to be, very cautious about clean cap tables and where can we actually see the growth markets open back up again, because late stage investors, IPOs, it's just extremely quiet, and so you have to be asking yourself, how long would we be holding the bag for, so to speak? And so that has meant I think most investors are over-rotating to risk off. And one of the biggest dangers for VCs like ourselves right now is to miss this window where there are lower valuations, there is good opportunity, because we're feeling nervous and scared. And so, what is investing? Investing is all psychology management, and I think that's what we need to do.
That was well said. I don't have that much to add. 2012 to 2018 was an awesome time to invest in Brazil. Then a lot of other people started investing for good reason, because there are real long-term tailwinds and secular trends. It's back to feeling really good. In practice, we've invested in 2 to 4 companies every year. So we just really try not to focus on the market environment and focus a lot more on, can we find the right founders as early as possible? If we screw up and we don't do it early, then we're open to doing it late. I think the market opportunity is really, really big. But right now, we were just covering, there's so much more talent in the region, which is, I think, always been the biggest question, because there are some big companies that have been built the last 10 years. A lot of people have learned how to do things. And for the people that are crazy enough to be founders now are the kind of founders we want to back. So it's I think a really good time to be early stage, but there's more capital. Growth stage, it's like a fantastic time to invest, because everybody who was kind of a tourist is gone for now. And we'll come back, because there'll be plenty of good reason to come back.
I'm going to put you on the spot just for a second, Nick, because Marco brought up the notion of companies becoming more efficient and stretching their cash runway out. So we're certainly seeing that phenomenon as well. And there's a lot of, Mercedes was talking about this sort of valuation mismatch now from 21. Do you think, what are you advising sort of your companies that are caught in that situation? Companies can continue to try to stretch cash runway, or do you sort of look realistically at a potential down round, et cetera? What dynamics can you share with us there?
Our advice, and not every founder wants to take it, is always to take the medicine, take the pain when the market gives you the opportunity to do it. The most rational thing is to raise a lot of money at a high price in a crazy environment. It doesn't mean you should do it, but if you want to do the rational thing in that environment and raise too much money, the rational thing to do in this environment, is not to raise. And then if you have to raise, get it done as quickly as you can, and explain to your team. And some of the best companies in the world, look, Stripe did a major down round, and it's okay. Facebook did a down round in the past. I think it's something people are probably too afraid of, and we're constantly just trying to tell them that it doesn't really matter in the long run. It matters where you exit, where you end up. So that's generally been our advice. Most companies, though, in 2021, Ribbit considered 95 follow-on financings. Like, there were 95 rounds raised by our portfolio, and last year it was 12. So people just aren't raising money yet, and I think that'll change a bit, but it's not changing overnight. It'll probably take another 12 to 18 months.
Well, we have so many fintech investors on the panel, so it would be a shame not to dive in a little bit deeper there. From our view at the bank, it sort of always followed the funding. It's a little less than 50% of the companies that we work with were fintech related. So, a lot of companies funded in the region. Obviously, the last year or two, particularly with really rising interest rates, have impacted valuations and to some degree more cautiousness around the sector. So, what areas are you kind of staying away from, or like buy now, pay later? So the consumer lending might be ones that I would think of, and then what areas might be, a great time to jump in terms of fintech? Who wants to take that?
I'm happy to say something to kick us off.
For it, Nick.
I think the more contrarian in fintech in general, the better. So if you're going to do lending, Mercedes and I were just talking about this before. If you're going to do lending, you should do it in this environment the next couple of years, because it's really a sin in a capital-intensive business, mostly to overpay for, and this is an environment where you can work with the best, highest quality lending companies and hopefully invest at a good price. So I think actually you should be probably running towards the things that people are running away from: lending, crypto, insurance. And otherwise you should be focusing on where there's a ton of change. So I do think investing in hot areas can be a good idea, right? Is like go where the action is. I think is classic Andy Grove advice. And so focusing on what's being built on top of picks, for example, I think is a really good thing to do. But otherwise I would be, I like the contrarian spaces.
Adriana, a lot of head nodding there.
No, it's just funny. We've mainly invested in insurance companies this year in the US. In LATAM, one of our best performing companies right now that raised one of the few oversubscribed Series Bs this year It's an auto lending company in Mexico. So it tells you that when you know how to manage a lending business, it can be an amazing. And in LATAM, it's so underpenetrated. The opportunity is still so big. It's about managing and pricing it the right way. Yeah, and then other than that, I think there's still a lot of opportunity in enhancing productivity for the biggest business matrix, which is SMBs and like mid-sized enterprises, and embed financial services in doing so. That's a space we spend a lot of time in. We've done a bunch of investments that don't look like fintech investments upfront, but we'll have to develop and sell lending and payment businesses in order to build meaningful scale and attractive margins. So we are excited for that space as well.
Mercedes, you got the hot mic here.
I think in Latin America, there is still a large opportunity to invest in financial products that are providing access to different segments of financial services for the first time for a lot of users and consumers, SMBs. And so that's still a large thematic theme that we're investing behind in the region. We have 2 companies fundraising at fintechs right now in Latin America that both have received lots of interest. And so we still think it's a good time, and totally agree with Nick. I mean, contrarian, I like to invest in things people aren't looking at. I did a crypto deal in Q3, and yeah, I have a lending business, that we were really interested in right now as well. And so for me, that's just, try to find the arbitrage, which is part of finding where other investors are not looking.
I would just add that eventually we might have new opportunities popping up, especially in Brazil. I mean, the central bank is actually a big promoter of the technology, right? And Nick was talking about blockchain, and now they just launched Drex, the digital currency in Brazil. Right now we have several pain points that most likely will be addressed by Drex, right? So when you are acquiring a real estate in Brazil,
can you explain that a little bit more for the audience?
Yeah, so it's actually the digital currency of Brazil, launched by central bank. It's going live January next year. It will be more in an experimental phase for 24, and eventually they will launch in 25. But what it can do, it's actually revolutionize the market, right? So when you think about smart contracts that you can add on top of Drex, just as an example, in Brazil, it's super tricky to buy or sell a car or a real estate, right? Because you never know, I should go to the notary before, but if I transfer in the notary, would the guy pay me? And it's always this big uncertainty, legal uncertainty, right? With Drex, actually, you can create a escrow account, a smart contract with an escrow account to support that sort of transaction. So I do envision lots of opportunities, and the central bank is actually fostering a lot of these innovations. So also take advantage of these regulatory aspects, especially in Brazil. I think it's a great opportunity.
I think one thing that I feel commonly people get wrong, or it's just not talked about enough, is how much these things like Drex you could see as a competitor to Pix, or you could see it as a competitor to open decentralized networks, like what's happening with stablecoins. But actually what happens is the volume of all of these things grow at the same time. So Pix is now $2 trillion in volume, but in the time that Pix has been growing, and maybe many of you know this, other forms of digital payments in Brazil have gone up by $5 trillion, including cards. It's just, so I think the benefit of all of this new infrastructure is felt by the innovative companies who know how to build it. And the central bank in Brazil has been, really far more progressive than almost any regulator anywhere in the world, maybe with the exception of India, but in a lot of ways more inspired and more creative in their thinking than India. So we should definitely keep investing in this space, and the companies who are going to take advantage of it.
Anybody have an interesting app company that's building itself off of Pix? Mercedes, you brought Pix up. Anything you're seeing along those lines worth sharing?
Yeah, well, the company Kumbuka we're building, we invested in, it's building on top of Pix and looking to be an asset-light banking layer. It's even more so building on top of open finance and the new payment initiation laws allowing non-bank entities to push transactions. And so I think that's a big innovation. We don't have that in the US. And this is, the Brazilian bank, like Nick said, is one of the most innovative in the world. I think actually part of what I always want to watch is if the Brazilian central bank is going to be able to stay as innovative. That's one of my big questions. Are there going to be changes at the top, as have been hinted? Have they accumulated too much power? And is the next president going to push out the top? And then are we going to be in a trough of regulation innovation for a while? And then if that's the case, how long will this regulation innovation phase we were in hold over for? And once the cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in. But I think we need to be very aware that this opportunity that presents itself in front of us in Brazil right now may not remain forever, and it'll come in cycles.
That's a fair point. Well, we know that the theme of the day has been AI, and so, I think the other content today has been mostly on, sort of technology broadly speaking, but maybe as it applies to LATAM, and these guys are just dying to talk about AI, I know it.
We love AI.
Marco, I'm going to start with you. How do you think AI is going to play out in Brazil or LATAM, and are you seeing any interesting examples of that?
As we were discussing, it's mostly like applications. That's how we see it. We do have like one company here, like Purdy, Ale, like it's running like customer analytics feedback, growing a lot, like in Brazil, especially with financial institutions there. But still, like as an application, so I don't see like any infrastructure play like coming from Brazil. I mean, especially because of the amount demanded here to support that sort of like operation. So, but I do see like very interesting opportunities coming from it.
Go for it.
Yeah, well, I think we could speculate if you say, well, what software opportunities were most interesting regionally, versus where you'd say, hey, there's going to be a global winner. They by and large have been in spaces that are more specific to the geography, more complex. There's a lot of regulation, there are a lot of rules. That's been really good for investing in a lot of fintech companies. You think about payroll or accounting; those tend to be very or tax. Those are very regional things. I think AI will just accelerate this trend because of sensitivity around how you store and manage data and the data network effects that you can get from having local, relevant data. And there will be lots and lots of companies, probably many of them vertical in nature, that will be better built in the region by great software developers in the region who access global infrastructure. So it just feels a bit early for that, but it's not that early. It's probably in the next few years that we should be investing in this, and we're seeing some awesome entrepreneurs working on this stuff, but it just feels so basic right now.
Anybody else? Okay, well, we're running short on time, but I wanted to give the audience at least a chance to ask a question or two. So does anybody have a question they would like to ask the panel?
Hi, Fabio from Indicator Capital. Just a question to compare Brazil and other markets, especially US, maybe other emerging markets, how you see the challenges on growing the companies that you invested, like growth and scaling, maybe on the fintech sector.
I would say one of the things I always focus on with my companies is just thinking about specialized talent, and in terms of certain markets, it's not Brazil. Maybe there's actually, I would say, very advanced specialized talent, but relative to maybe a market like the US, for example, if I'm looking for example, fraud specialists, Nubank has built a ton of great people in the region, and there's also fraud specialists that probably in other markets too. And so I'm always asking my team to go very, very wide globally in their search for what does AAA talent look like, and make sure they're pulling their resources in, because until recently, a lot of the Nubank team was very locked up. They weren't leaving, they're starting to roll out, but I think that had been kind of a more tightly closed ecosystem for a bit in terms of getting them to actually join your company. And so that's where we're really focusing the talent.
Brazil versus other markets, and it's not just Brazil, but say Brazil versus the US, it's usually about talent is what we worry about the most, and less now than we did 10 years ago. I think people talk a lot about exits, but as was pointed out maybe on the last panel, there have been a lot of successful exits too, certainly much more than in many of the other emerging markets that Brazil gets compared to. So That's probably it.
So Marina, and no company for now, but actually my question is like, within your portfolio, have you seen, you mentioned a lot about the fintechs and how they benefit in Brazil about the favorable regulation of the Brazilian Central Bank. Do you see companies who started like Brazilian and are migrating to the US and bringing solutions, increasing their market position and addressable market? Do you have cases, positive cases?
We do have cases. I mean, it's also part of our thesis, but it's more on the SaaS side of it. It's not in the fintech. Yeah, so it also depends on the sector, right? But in the SaaS side of it, like we do see. So Ale from Birdie is actually a good case. So the company was born actually here in the US, but a Brazilian team. And we also have like Rodrigo from DGB. He was speaking this morning. Like he also is a good case. They started like in Brazil, and instead of like following the natural like route going to Mexico, which is the next largest market like in Latin America, they are coming to the US. So we do see more and more often like those founders that are willing to become like global like companies versus just like a regional play. But it definitely depends on the sector.
I can add 2 examples outside of Brazil that are Colombian companies, and I think these can apply to Brazil as well. It's like Symmetric and On Top, 2 investments in our portfolio. They both set out to start selling regionally within LATAM, but both of their products actually have global applications. One of them is remote payroll, the other is an ERP for payment processors, and they've both expanded their sales force to be global. So there's potential to that. It has to be outside of highly regulated products. Like a lender can't do that. But yeah, you can. Talent is there.
What I would say is 10 years ago, I didn't hear any entrepreneurs talking about it. And now it's pretty common to hear entrepreneurs saying we're going to start in Brazil, but we're moving to other markets. So
The one other thing I would add is, fintech is, like, as Adriana said, is largely a local phenomenon in that there's local rules about how money can move. But the area where I am seeing companies expand is in cross-border money movement and also global USD accounts. A lot of companies from Brazil are creating and actually buying US banks right now for this purpose. And then fraud prevention tools for financial services, which are mostly SaaS models. I've seen a lot of those going cross-border and selling into the US as well.
Any other question?
Okay, I think we are about out of time. I'm going to ask one last Twitter-style question, which is just, looking ahead into 2024, rating on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best. What number would you assign for 2024? In terms of progress in the ecosystem, venture deployment, and why? And no more than a sentence on that. Mercedes.
It can only go up from here. This was an awful year.
Oh, I'd assign a 6.
Oh, right. Well, if this year is like a 3 or 2, next year is a 5.
5 and 6.
Yeah, I think we're in the long, productive slog phase of the market.
Yeah, I was going to say something like a 7, but I feel like I'm too optimistic now. So, yeah, largely somewhere in the middle with still lots of upside opportunity to capture. It's a way to think about it.
You're doing a lot of early, that's why you're optimistic.
That's true.
And it makes a lot of difference, actually, right? I would stick to the 6. I think we should have like a recovery of the market by, end of next year. But we already see like more activity in the early stage.
So that was, thank you, Nick. So I think we had a 5, 6, 7, 7, so 6, and I'll join Adriana in a 7. I'm an optimist as well. 6 and change, yeah. All right, well, please join me in thanking this awesome panel.